Hello and welcome to today's APBP webinar. This is a free webinar on the Green Lane project, and we're going to be looking at the use of language today. So if you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, I'd like you to make note of this telephone number. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Kit Keller. I'm Executive Director of APBP. And we're delighted to have a number of excellent speakers who will be exploring a very interesting topic today. This webinar is part of a series that is a collaboration between APBP and People4Bikes, so our thanks to People4Bikes and the Green Lane Project. And we can provide you with a certificate of attendance for today's webinar. However, because of the more conversational tone of this particular webinar, we did not apply for a CM credit. So there you have it. If you would like to obtain a certificate of attendance, you can certainly download it there. And we do ask that you email APBP to let us know that you can attended the webinar today. We're hard at work at APBP planning our professional development seminar. It's coming along beautifully. The theme this year is flexibility, and we actually will have a 201 and a 301 level presentation on separated bike lanes. So we do hope that you'll be able to participate in that webinar, or sorry, in that conference in St. Louis if this is a topic of interest to you. And of course, there are many other topics that we'll cover as well at the PDS. So let's jump right into our presenters today. Michael Andersen is the Green Lane Project staff writer at People4Bikes. Doug Gordon is with BrooklynSpoke.com, and Cathy Tuttle is Executive Director of the Seattle Neighborhood Greenways. And I'll just highlight a few things about each of them. Michael Andersen is the person who wrote most of the building equity report that People4Bikes recently released, and I highly encourage you to take a look at that. Michael, I don't know if you're the only person who's ever been a member at the same time of APBP and Online News Association, but perhaps that's so. Cathy Tuttle, we're happy to have your perspective from Seattle. We are very intrigued with your background with a PhD in urban design and planning and the way that you use data and work with people. So we can hardly wait for your presentation. And Doug Gordon writes BrooklynSpoke.com, which is a blog dedicated to bicycling and safe streets in New York City. He has spoken at a number of conferences, including the National Bike Summit, and he is a seasoned television producer. He bikes using a Dutch bicycle and carries 2 kids, so look for him if you're in New York. And with that, I will turn the presentation and the webinar over to Michael Andersen. And Michael, you'll see a message that the screen is coming to you. And we see your slides.
Yeah, thanks, Kit. So yeah, I am Michael Andersen with People4Bikes, and thanks for the invitation to put this together, and thanks everybody for coming to learn about this. I'm going to give you the super quick overview of the Green Lane Project, the organization I work with, and how our work fits into this stuff. We are here to change the idea that this is a bike lane into the idea that this is a bike lane. We are trying to spread the idea of protected bike lanes around the country, import it from Europe and remix it and put it into an American context so people can understand what it looks like. And it's been pretty successful. The number of bike lanes continues to grow exponentially. The protected bike lanes continues to grow exponentially, and understanding of it does as well, I hope, too. So we've seen it in New York City was a pioneer in this, where Doug is from. And so it was part of the front guard of looking at the ways people think about these things, talk about these things in an American context. And that idea spread rapidly to cities like DC and Seattle, where our other presenter, Cathy, is from. San Francisco, Memphis, Houston, Detroit are all working on these projects right now. Here's one in Northridge, Los Angeles. Here's one in Indianapolis. Here's one in Southern California. And the reason we're excited about this stuff is that they're a proven way to increase ridership, 75% growth in the first year on one of these projects in the number of people choosing to use the routes over the previous alignment. And that's, of course, because people feel so much safer when they use them. It's a sense of calm and peace and understanding of how the street works. It really brings order to the street for people who are riding, walking, driving, whatever. The ways we support that is we write a blog about sort of best practices around this stuff and help people learn more and connect with each other, other experts doing this. We conduct surveys like this one of practitioners and share their information with people like the Federal Highway Administration, other institutions, and we work with 5 cities or 6 cities at a time to sort of help them lead the charge for the best practices around the country. That's the way it works. You can check out our website. That'll forward to our front page, and you can follow us on various social media or get our email newsletter. Comes once a week with a post or two about the latest news and best practices around this stuff. And of course, the other thing we do is convene webinars like this and bring experts from places like Seattle and New York to help other people think and talk better about this. So today's session is focused specifically on the ways that language and framing and communication can affect the way that people in the public, in the media, in other institutions think about protected bike lanes, bicycling in general, deal with the anxieties that people naturally feel when they're confronted with change in their communities, and help them understand the ways that it can help them. So I will pass it on to Cathy Tuttle of Seattle Neighborhood Greenways. Thanks very much.
All right, great. Thank you, Cathy. You are on. You should be seeing a message to show my screen. Hi, Cathy. Do you see the message to show my screen? Cathy, you're muted.
Okay. I'd like to see the show my screen again.
Okay,
Are we okay?
I'll bring the slide presentation back, and then we'll send it back to you. Sometimes it gets hidden behind your slides, and you should see it now.
Okay. Are we on?
No, I don't see your slides yet.
Hello?
I don't see your slides, Cathy. So let's try that one more time. You might need to minimize your...
Okay, show my screen. Here we go.
Oh, you got it. Great. Good. We see your slides.
Are we up here now?
Yes, good. Looks great.
Terrific. Thanks a lot, Kit.
Of course.
Okay. Thanks, Michael, too. So, again, I'm Cathy Tuttle. I'm the director of Seattle Neighborhood Greenways, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about our organization. We started out in 2011 as a couple of people meeting in a church basement, advocating for, of course, neighborhood greenways. And in case you don't know what greenways are, they're generally streets one off of main arterials with a low volume of traffic, engineered to go slowly enough so that people who walk or ride bicycles feel safe and comfortable on them. They're still one of our favorite engineering solutions for providing safe streets in residential areas, but we've since morphed, because we are this crowdsourced, user-driven coalition, into advocating for more than neighborhood greenways. We are a broader safe streets advocacy organization that supports protected bike lanes, places for people who walk. We are now a coalition of more than 20 neighborhood groups across Seattle, each with its own local leadership that plans, advocates for, and activates safe, equitable, comfortable streets for people. In the past few years, as a coalition, we've directly influenced more than 25 million in Seattle safe streets and engineering. Our group is the reason that 245 miles of neighborhood greenways are included as part Seattle's Bike Master Plan. The Seattle Greenways, Wallingford Greenway, are responsible for greenways in their neighborhoods that
Excuse me,
have
Kathy?
timers, and an astonishingly professional. Yes, yes,
Yes, I beg your pardon, but
yes.
I'm getting a little bit of a delay, and I'm just checking to see if any of the other presenters are also hearing that. It seems like your audio is going in and out a bit.
Oh no.
So just a reminder to close anything that you're not actively using and to give as much power as you can to your audio.
Okay. It is fully on.
Okay, good. Well, we'll keep an eye on it. Go ahead.
Okay. Again, the slides that you see here are greenways that have been built by our active coalition. Something that we've learned from our amazing professional volunteers is new ideas and new ways to use language. We've learned research techniques from anthropologists and neuroscientists, public space planning from landscape architects, user experience concepts from some of Seattle's finest high-tech experts, and the language of public health from our healthcare professionals. What we've learned from our neuroscientists is that our personal social identity and emotional empathy are both brain-based functions of mirror neurons. And we've started to understand this emotional language and how it works in persuasive communication that's used in advertising. We use mirror language tools consciously when we're advocating for safe, family-friendly streets. So Kit, is that still that time delay?
No, you're good. Thanks,
Okay,
Kathy. Keep
great.
going.
So this road-tested language is the result of putting neuroscience theory into practical practice. At public meetings with all kinds of people, our local leaders from those 20 groups have learned it's critical to talk about hyper-local issues when talking about their own neighborhood. We focus on people and their needs. People need quiet streets to raise a family. They need to walk to the bus stop to feel comfortable dropping their kids off at school. We don't talk about modes of transportation. It is our local leaders of those 20 groups who have really field tested this universal language. Before I go any further, I wanted to call out 2 volunteers. Merlin Rainwater was a retired nurse who taught us never to call a crash an accident, and also taught us the language of health prevention that we use a lot in this language. And then also user experience engineer Bob Edmison. I also wanted to recognize my coworker Gordon Padelford, who assembled and expanded this crowdsourced document that you're looking at now of road-tested language. We're constantly evolving and updating it because we've learned the language that we use every day has the ability to change how people think about street safety and livable streets. So here are some specific examples of how we use this. Those clever cars. First and foremost, we have realized how important it is to focus on people and their experiences, not infrastructure, not modes of transportation, not buzzwords, and not driverless vehicles. This car did not drive into a building by itself. We do pick up the phone and call out local journalists and TV producers when they have cars running around Seattle by themselves. Of course, there is a special case of self-driving vehicles coming soon to a city near you. By calling out this tragic act of traffic violence as an accident, we automatically are framing traffic deaths as unavoidable byproducts of our transportation system. We've implied that nothing can be done about accidents. In reality, traffic deaths are not inevitable. The word accident traps us in a 1950s era car-dominated world and limits how we think about solutions and responsibility. This is the language of Vision Zero, and using the right language is journalistically responsible. And then there are the bikers. These are bikers. We have learned how important it is to connect with people in terms of shared values, and ordinary people, when they think about bikers don't think about people on bikes. It is a label and a stereotype. We want politicians and our neighbors to think about real people. Likewise, many of us conjure up an image that does no good in our quest for safer streets when we call ourselves cyclists or our supporters. We are people who bike. Most of us can and do relate on a more personal level to my dad who bikes, or a bike birthday party, or a mom and her kids biking, or meeting a neighbor for a bike ride, or a third-grade girl who is learning to ride her bike. These are people who bike. Similarly, most people see themselves as people who walk, not pedestrians. A simple word switch invites people to see themselves in the picture and reminds us that everybody gets around in different ways at different times. This helps our community begin to imagine ways to help everyone go safely from one place to another, whether they are walking to school, rolling in a wheelchair, riding their bike, driving, or taking transit. Choosing the best ways for your family to get around the city is what we're trying to accomplish. At least that's the mission of my group. It's really good to use familiar, concrete examples that are easy to visualize. Parking your bike at the library, waiting at the bus stop, dropping your kids off at school. This is the language we speak when we're talking about transportation options. Never, ever think about opening a conversation with the words multimodal level of service. Our coalition of thoughtful local leaders and advocates has learned through thousands of conversations what works well and what connects us to our shared humanity. Every word matters. Language is powerful. Begin by listening to your own words. I still catch myself slipping into that non-personal language, and I've got a lifetime of calling out horrific acts of traffic violence as accidents too. I make the same mistake. I'm retraining myself. And then I encourage you to listen and observe carefully in your own community. I encourage you to work with your local reporters and local political leaders, take them out to lunch, and present them with new language options. Remember that transportation planning and advocacy comes with its own vocabulary, acronyms, and insider shorthand. You've probably spent years learning those acronyms. I'm telling you to avoid them. Jargon confuses people, and worse yet, the policy speak that we sometimes use obscures the most important message of all, which is, why should I care about safe, livable streets? When you confuse people, you end up alienating them, and they could be your friendly allies. We'll gladly share this document, of course, a result of years of road-tested vocabulary. Take it as you're learning to talk about people who bike. We've learned that words and messages can bring people together and build support for smart solutions. They also create more civil and productive public discourse around how we design our streets for people who walk and bike. Just remember to consistently use language that's about people. Thanks.
Cathy, thank you so much. That was fascinating and a wonderful contribution to how to speak about walking and biking and people who walk and bike. So brilliant. Well done. I am going to send the controls now over to Doug Gordon. So Doug, you'll see a message that you've been made the presenter, and we see your slides.
Excellent. Let me go to full screen, and I will begin.
Great. And you'll want to also hit the slideshow.
Yep, sorry. There we go. Great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the kind of language of images and how we here in Brooklyn, specifically in my neighborhood of Park Slope, kind of fought back against a very intense backlash, as we called it. So first of all, it's good to get this stuff out of the way because I think they're universal to everyone across the country. Here are some of the common things that people complain about when they're talking about cyclists or bikes. You know, they'll say, I like bikes, but I just saw one run a red light. Cyclists are scofflaws. They'll say we don't need the bike lanes because there's nobody who bikes. At the same time, they'll say bike lanes are dangerous because there are too many cyclists. And kind of my favorite is, this isn't Amsterdam. You'll constantly hear, probably already heard people define your city by what it is not. because of course, who wouldn't want this? This is Gabe Pressman, who's kind of one of the dean of the New York City Press Corps, saying, this is in Amsterdam, we have many narrow streets and a great number of cars and trucks. You hear this everywhere. This is Minneapolis, St. Paul, basically people saying St. Paul wants to be like Portland. How long does the snow last in Portland? Never mind that the Minneapolis-St. Paul area has a huge number of cyclists. Chicago, this is not some Seattle coffee grunge pothead experiment. This is Chicago, as if just saying this is Chicago means something in and of itself. And so keep all that stuff in mind as I talk about our case study here, the Prospect Park West bike lane. Manhattan, kind of in the middle of your screen. The arrow points to where I am sitting, Park Slope. It's one of the kind of more, this is Prospect Park itself. It's a very prestigious address, Prospect Park West, some of the most expensive real estate in New York City. So pedestrian safety has been a problem all over here for a long time. This is Grand Army Plaza at the north end of Prospect Park West. 1927, they felt the need to count the number of people who had been killed in crashes that year. So starting in 2006, we had a very public process. 2010, 4 years later, DOT redesigns Prospect Park West from the 3-lane speedway you see on the left to the 2-lane street on the right with a protected 2-way bike lane running along the side of the park. And it was an instant success. Virtually overnight, you see kids on it, you see people safely crossing the street. The street really starts to work for everybody, drivers too. It was safer for people on foot. Every intersection had those pedestrian islands you see there on the right side of the screen. It just was fantastic. But not everybody was happy about it, specifically the people who lived on Prospect Park West. And these flyers started appearing all around the neighborhood. You can see the kind of increased number of question marks as each claim here is listed at the top. Lots of concerns. But this wasn't really your average group of bikehaters. This was Norman Steisel, who is a former deputy mayor under Rudy Giuliani. This is Iris Weinschall, herself a former DOT commissioner, and also married to Senator Chuck Schumer. So you can imagine there was a lot of leverage behind this. This is kind of what we were up against. They hired a major litigation firm. They took their case pro bono and actually sued the city to get it removed, saying that they had kind of violated a public process, which simply wasn't true. They launched a very sophisticated media campaign using their connections in the press and television stations. This was them showing a traffic jam allegedly caused by the empty bike lane, as if there wasn't traffic before. And so our natural instinct, I think anybody's natural instinct would be to argue the facts. You would talk about the number of people who are biking, the safety stats, the fact that sidewalk cycling completely disappeared. It went from 46% of all cyclists to 3% of all cyclists, all kinds of stuff. And it was very popular, 70% approval in a lot of the polls. But the facts are kind of meaningless. It's my favorite Simpsons quote, "Facts are meaningless. You could use facts to prove anything that's even remotely true." I like to say that if you're explaining, you're losing. That means you're on the defense. Really, for a lot of this, it's about anecdotes, personal experience, and really passion. That's what's going to attract the most attention. And so you have to know that if the other side is going to play it, you have to play that too. This was a big protest that was staged on the bike lane on October 21st of 2010. Here is the president of Neighbors for Better Bike Lanes, which was actually against the bike lane, and there's your "we will never be Amsterdam" quote, "we will never be Copenhagen or Portland." And here's really what we felt it was all about. Here's a sign that was kind of left behind, not in that big crowd parking. We'll get to talk about that a little more. We staged a counter demonstration. We got word that they were doing this, and we rallied the troops. And there's the executive director of Transportation Alternatives, Paul Steely-White, with his cargo bike. We had tons of people there, all ages, old, young, everything in between. We easily outnumbered them, 300 people to their 50. But the press covers it as a sort of he said, she said sort of thing. Opponents protested last month alongside supporters of the lanes, as if it was equal. Because the media really likes a good, I think, he said, she said story. So we started to get a little smarter. This was a public meeting that was held about the bike lane, and the advocacy organizations here handed out those green stickers that you see everybody wearing. I'm in the pink shirt in the middle. And then the first speaker from one of the advocacy organizations just called it out. How many people here support the Prospect Park West bike lane? We raised our hand, and this was the picture that started appearing alongside news reports. So it wasn't anymore both sides disagree about the bike lane. Then we staged a non-protest bike ride. There were no signs, no political signs, no angry comments or anything directed at the opponents. We just got kids in cute t-shirts on bikes riding up and down the bike lane, had a really big party, and made it about this, about who was really using the bike lane. August 2011, the lawsuit is thrown out and we win. So my advice is really less of this. This was a giant argument at a community board meeting when City Bike was being installed, and more of this. This is what you want. This is what it's about. It is about a dad taking his kid up and down the bike lane to go to school, to go to the library, much like Cathy said. Just to sum up that part, you really want to avoid arguing. Don't disagree with people. Just talk about what you want to talk about. If you're explaining, you're losing. And we're going to use pictures and people to tell a story, not facts and figures. I'll give one more example. The Brooklyn paper is kind of our local grocery store rag, but they have a big online following. And they have a regular column called Mean Streets, dividing people into cyclists, pedestrians, and drivers. This is kind of a representation of their coverage, the defiant cyclist who is upset with people, with the cops ticketing them. You know, the danger of cycling, you might get hit by a rock. The oddity of cycling, here is a very strange hipster woman on a bike with a flute on a windswept, empty bike lane. This is not the image of cycling that I think really anybody wants. So last year, amidst a lot of the Vision Zero talk in New York City, there was a growing backlash. If there was going to be all of this focus on stopping dangerous driving, well, then cyclists ought to get theirs. And the Brooklyn paper was pitched by a group of people on a story about ticketing cyclists for infractions like running red lights or riding on the sidewalk. Problems in and of themselves, but not giant problems in the grand scheme of stopping pedestrian and cyclist and motorist fatalities. And they contacted me and said, would you like to comment for the story, and we'd like to take your picture? And I initially said no. I didn't say this part, but I didn't want to be portrayed as the cyclist. I knew they had a character in mind for me to play. Was this the character that I wanted to be? This is not me, but this was what I was thinking probably they would be going for. Cyclist standing alongside his bike or on top of his bike, helmet, just how he would ride on a sidewalk even, just wasn't who I wanted to be. So I called a friend and said, look, what should I do? Should I do it? Should I not do it? And he said, yeah, do it. Do it anyway. He said, don't bring your bike, but bring your kind of secret weapon. I said, what's that? He said, your daughter. So we posed for this picture instead. That was my daughter, then 4, with her bike alongside 4th Avenue, one of the most dangerous streets in Brooklyn. And even though they still ran the same story with the same narrative about people wanting cyclists to get tickets, this was the picture they ran. It was policing the bikes, wanting people to get tickets. And here was, if you note the caption, activists want cyclists such as Doug Gordon, pictured here with his daughter Kelly, to get more tickets. So, the picture says it all. What would my daughter or I get a ticket for here? Nothing. I'm just a regular Joe with his daughter who wants a safe street. So it was a way to subvert the narrative that they had in mind. So a picture is worth 1,000 words. And really what you want to say is that people who bike, much like Cathy said, are regular people. So if you are contacted by the media, if you're in an advocacy organization, or if you're in government and you're trying to make the case for this, no Lycra, no reflective vests, Helmets, I would say if you're just standing on the street corner giving an interview and you're on camera, take off the helmet. If you're riding and you wear one, sure, wear one. If you don't need to, don't wear one. And also wear a tie. This was a debate between two attorneys discussing a city bike station outside of a condo, and if you had to guess which one was the cyclist, you wouldn't. You wouldn't be able to. In fact, the producer of this segment, when he looked at the two guys, he said to the guy on the right, "So you're the cyclist, right? Why?" Because he was wearing a bow tie. Well, it turns out actually the man on the left was the pro-cyclist, pro-bike share advocate attorney. So look sharp when you're ever on camera. This is a series that Streets Blog ran, just a big series of pictures, more picture than text. This guy is a EMT with the fire department. This guy, I think, is a doctor on the east side of Manhattan. This woman, I believe, was actually a house cleaner. Just a mom taking her kid to school. They ran all of these pictures. A local superintendent of a building taking his bike down the Prospect Park West bike lane. A graduate student getting off a train at Grand Central and hopping on a city bike. So, you know, anytime anyone online would say, oh, these hipsters and their bikes, we would just send them this picture. We would just send them this picture. We would just send them this picture. This man is in his 80s and uses city bike to get around the neighborhood. So really, to wrap up, I think that's what you want. Cyclists are normal people. They are a dad with his two kids. That's me on my big Dutch bike with my kids. And we're just going for a fun, nice ride. And I think if you can keep it people-focused, if you can keep it fun, if you can keep it about safety, I think you are at a huge advantage. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. That was wonderful, Doug. I'm going to real quick launch a poll, and we'd like to know how many people are watching today's webinar with you at your location. So if you will go ahead and complete the poll, we'd like to leave it open until we get a nice percentage. And then we'll go to a lively discussion, which Michael will moderate with the speakers, and we'll also be taking questions. So if you have questions that you would like to pose, this is a good time once you voted to go ahead and post a question in the question box. So we're almost at 90%. If I can get a couple more people to vote, we'll be right there, which would be my goal. So, oh, just one or two more people. We're really close. Great. I feel like a yes, I feel much like a public radio announcer trying to get people to donate, which is happening right now. Anyway, there you have it. Thanks so much. And we are now going to open the presentation up to the conversation. So, Michael, I'm going to go ahead and post a photo of your slide, so just bear with me while I bring that up, and then we'll be able to see the people who are actually speaking today. So I'm going to go ahead.
Actually, I feel like this slide ought to work fine if we can have the three hour photos. Perfect.
There you go.
Cool. Guys, thanks so much. That was terrific. I'm going to shoot some questions we've got sort of preloaded here, but as Kit said, we'll be looking for anybody else's as well. One question I've got to start things off for Doug. A lot of what both Doug and Cathy, both of you were saying, was obviously from your perspective, Cathy's case as the director of a nonprofit, Doug's case as an interested citizen. So for Doug, you are like the dream collaborator for a project manager, right? A lot of the folks who are listening today are probably folks in city government. How can somebody in city government find you and like get you to be engaged enough to put time into this? What do you want to hear somebody say to persuade you to like take an afternoon off when you need to, that sort of thing?
Right. I mean, just a personal touch is always helpful, a quick email. I think there's a perception kind of from my side that finding the person in government, that person is inaccessible or busy. Why are they just going to listen to Joe Citizen when they've got city council people or other people to try to convince. But every once in a while, I would get very friendly, nice emails from people in the Department of Transportation, just not running things by me, but saying, hey, we're going to do this, what do you think? Or there's a big meeting coming up, could you be there? And just forging those personal connections, I think, was hugely important. And also, they would, to use Cathy's language, kind of road test a few things with me. You know, I'm not an expert. I am not a planner. I am not educated in this professionally. I've kind of just soaked it all up through osmosis. And so what I think I've been able to help some of my people, some of the local government officials with, or planners here, is how does this sound to me, to my wife, to my friends? You know, are you using jargon that's going to just go over most people's heads? So I think just making those personal connections and kind of running a few things by people really helps. And in terms of finding people like me, I mean, I think there is, in almost every city, a very active social media presence. There are active advocacy organizations. Reach out to them. They can identify the kind of the big advocates, the people who are really interested in showing up to stuff.
I would jump in here too. I mean, Doug talked about his secret weapon, and it truly is. I mean, that is the, first of all, it's the thing that is most effective at community events, is to have children with you. And also, I think it's also something that motivates people to become advocates and to dedicate time to being strong advocates, is because they really care about their children. I'm sure that's true of Doug, that you got a lot more involved as you became you know, when you were a parent.
I mean, actually, it wasn't the case for me. I got differently involved when I was a parent. I was involved before this. So yeah, I hate to be contrary to that point, but I do think it's a good point. I think you can engage a lot of parents who might not necessarily pay attention to the car that's failing to yield in a crosswalk. Now they're going to pay attention a little more when they're holding their kid's hand. I do think there's value in that. But I think you can engage all kinds of different people who aren't necessarily who aren't necessarily parents too. I think there's lots of different ways to engage individual, active, concerned citizens.
Oh, absolutely. I wasn't saying it's just parents. I think that it's a great source of really dedicated advocates.
Oh, sure. It's a huge, and I think it's untapped. Advocacy organizations should be doing a better job of actually tapping parents into the fold.
Great. Cathy, you said that well, you were talking about the importance of getting away from the phrases, you know, the modally specific phrases like cyclist or pedestrian that implies that, you know, if we're a motorist, we would drive our garbage can to the curb every morning, right? But that's not something that an elected official, for example, is going to naturally be aware of, probably. It's going to require some sort of coaching. They've got a zillion things to think about. They're going to be caught talking about city projects constantly. You work pretty closely with elected officials. What tricks have you learned for sort of helping elected folks to understand the ways that this language can shape that? Do you think they're more or less attuned to shaping their language around these issues?
It depends on the official, but I think it's something, again, at the very beginning of my presentation, I talked about mirroring and actually using that language again and again and again. I think it's something that seeps into their language as they hear us using it, as they, you know, as at every community meeting, if people are talking about people who bike rather than people who, you know, rather than cyclists or bikers, they're going to change what they say as well. And definitely we do sit down with them and explicitly talk about the need to change that language if they're interested in making the change in the city, that they need to speak to the city that they want to become, which is a city of people who are comfortable, whether they're walking, biking, or using any other kind of transportation.
Yeah. Anything on that, Doug?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Cathy. I mean, just those little language tweaks that the planners can use that don't take a whole lot of effort. Instead of cyclists, people who bike, it's huge. It just changes everything in just a few words.
Great. What, Doug, you were talking a lot about the importance of images and getting those out there. Do you have any suggestions for either harvesting good images like that? I mean, a lot of people aren't going to have the resources of, Streets blog in their town writing about this stuff. Where can people find good images of ordinary people biking? Like governments need to do photo shoots of this to have it in stock? How big does a stock library of such images need to be? Do you have any thoughts on any of that?
I think it's really easy to get this kind of stuff. I mean, if we didn't have this in New York right now, I would just pick a morning, go to the end of the Manhattan Bridge as it goes down into Manhattan from Brooklyn, and even with just an iPhone, I could probably snap hundreds of pictures of people coming off the bridge on their way into work, and I could probably capture someone in medical scrubs, a student, people of all different races, different ages, and could probably start using that as just a great way to look at it. Go to a park on a sunny afternoon with an inexpensive photographer, and you could start building it. You don't need that much. You don't need to have hundreds of images. You could start with just going out for a half hour and getting 50 great pictures and start circulating those. And suddenly, when a lot of times people put up at meetings, planners especially, the pictures for their projects or their proposals, they put a picture of the project and maybe some stock image of a cyclist in a helmet. Instead, put a picture of a mom with a kid on the back riding a bike along the street that you're hoping to change. I think that is immeasurably helpful.
This is something that we've done with our Department of Transportation, is actually fed them images too, because we really do want to swap out the images in a lot of their presentations that are these stock photos of a biker in Lycra whenever they talk about biking. So we've been very systematic about using really good images.
And in this day and age, you can also just directly contact people on social media and say, hey, I love the picture you took of the bike share station that we just laid out. Can I use it in a presentation? Chances are they'll say yes.
Yes. Never use a picture without attribution.
Right. Great. Let's see. Cathy, in terms of disseminating the language, you have to deal with a group, like a broadly diverse group of people who are in favor of the projects that you're in favor of. How do you go about convincing people who are accustomed to being biking activists, for example, that this is something that they should think about and take seriously? Is there a sort of a feeling of loss among people who are proud to think of themselves as cyclists to be told, no, don't use that word? Or do you think that people are eager to adjust their language?
It's very situational, and it's an ongoing process. I mean, surely you all are familiar with the whole vehicular cyclist, thing that's still with us, and we do need to respect that these were pioneers who used our streets as vehicles, and that they need to be respected. But I think that there's a whole up and coming generation who understand that we just want a city that is accepting of all kinds of people who bike. And I think that's been something that the first couple of year or two we were engaged in retraining a lot of the kind of the hardcore spandex people, but that's changed. That's changed radically in the last couple of years, and I think it's probably a national phenomenon, not just in Seattle.
Yeah. Great. Let's move on to some questions from folks. We got some in advance. So I'll start with those in advance of the session. One question, is there a similar backlash that either of you are familiar with against pedestrian infrastructure anywhere, or is this just a bicycle phenomenon? I think, Doug, you had something on that?
Yeah, we saw the exact same thing happen here in New York City with everything from the pedestrian plaza that was put in to Times Square, on a large scale, to the very smaller pedestrian plazas there was one at the Putnam Triangle here in Brooklyn, which is a very small one. And we heard a lot of the same kind of things. It was going to kill traffic. It was going to kill business. We heard that it was going to attract vagrants, increase crime, loiterers, homeless, all that kind of stuff. And those fears, of course, never really materialized. So it was a lot of the same stuff, and we used, I think, a lot of the same tactics. You know, talking about an elderly woman who just wants somewhere to sit after she buys a coffee, a family that gets lunch from a nearby business and would love to sit outside. So what that would do for business, what that would do for families, what that would do for individuals. We used a lot of the same tactics to fight back some of that stuff too.
Yeah, great.
And the number one victim of traffic violence is people who walk. And so that's something else too, is that when you take away the ability of people who are driving to drive willy-nilly and speed and make right turns on red and not stop for, you know, people who want to cross at a crosswalk, you are taking away some of their quote-unquote freedoms, and you do get some backlash against people walking. But, you know, it is part of kind of retraining our society for Vision Zero, that people have rights as ordinary people when they're walking. So yes, there's definitely a backlash about that whole, you know, we have power when we step into that metal box, and that's an attitude that really needs to change. Yeah.
Cathy, here's a question for you that I think you had a good answer to. If there's an awareness of what's going on, if maybe a government has taken one tack in its language and then changes its language, if people notice that, or maybe they hear about the fact that this is an effort that's being circulated to manipulate the public, and people take umbrage at that. How do you respond to somebody who says this is manipulating the public, this is Orwellian?
Well, we are manipulating the public, but you know, we do it because we're trying to talk about reality. We are talking about the reality of traffic violence. We're not talking about accidents, which is a euphemism for something terrible that happens on our streets. You know, we are talking about the reality of wanting to use places, you know, that are livable for people rather than turning streets into fast-moving corridors. I mean, you know, we're taking. I feel like we're taking the high road here in a sense, because we are the people that are calling out the reality as we see it. You know, when actually there was an incident just the other day where somebody was saying, oh, you know, I have to get around this construction zone on my bicycle because, you know, the construction people have put out all these barriers on our protected bike lane. And I said, well, why, you know, what do you do about that? And they said, well, there's this long thing and it takes weeks for the city to respond. And I said, listen, if there was that big, the street was cut off by something like that and you were driving, you might call 911. You could call 911 and that's it. And that's sense. Right. I mean, we have to realize that, you know, we have power in the streets, and that you know, we've been manipulated with language about jaywalking, with language about accidents, with language about things that really are, you know, there are streets, and we need to claim them with the language that we use as well as the actions that we take.
Yeah. So I guess the difference between Orwellian language and this language is that you're not saying that war is peace, you're saying that people get around the city in different ways. Something like that.
Absolutely.
The parking issue is something that we all run into questions about, because people, you know, have such an ingrained set of ideas about what parking is, how it works. Obviously very valuable, so people are sensitive to any changes to that. What suggestions do either of you have about changing language to adjust people's thoughts about what parking is, street parking is, off-street parking is, how it works, the function it serves, who owns it, that sort of thing?
I'll give two examples. I think that one good strategy is never to talk about, well, not never, but to avoid, if you can, talking about hard numbers and focusing on hard numbers. So if you have a project such as Prospect Park West, it was a mile long, and in order to install it, was going to require the removal of 12 parking spaces. That can sound like a lot if you are a driver who gets home every night and has to circle for 20, 30 minutes looking for parking. Instead, a better way to think about it would be to talk about it as a percentage of the overall parking, either on a corridor or in a defined geographic area, because my bet is that 12 parking spaces in all of Park Slope is less than 1%, like half of 1% of all parking. So that's going to sound a lot better. You know, we're going to see a decrease of 0.5% in the number of parking spaces, but an increase in safety by about 40%, or an increase in the number of people using the street by 60%. So then you diminish those numbers. I think the other tactic I would say, for example, when we install bike corrals here in New York City, that often gets very contentious. And DOT for a long time was saying that they were going to remove one parking space and replace it with bike parking. Well, the word remove just sent up some sort of red flag for lots of people and often put people on the defense. No, you can't remove parking. So we instead say swap. I've advised people here to say, we're going to swap one car parking space with space for 8 bicycles. And so then a business owner thinks, wow, you know, 1 customer versus 8 customers. So I think those are 2 tactics that you can use to just with a quick, you know, reversal of the language, swap versus remove or replace, to start changing how people are thinking about it. Also, swapping parking means that both are equal. I'll give you this one and you get that one. So it elevates the bicycle to the level of a car.
Cathy, any thoughts?
I was thinking at the beginning when you asked the question, Michael, about how valuable parking is. I mean, I think that business owners and people who own cars do sense the value, particularly of free parking, and that, you know, that's something that you need to acknowledge, that it is something of great value, and that, you know, fortunately, you know, your city, as Doug said, in any 1 mile corridor provides plenty of that value. Maybe not quite at the free cost that you were used to, but there's still plenty of that valuable place to store your vehicle. So I think it's a conversation that you have to be very sensitive about, but, you know, also, you know, respect that you are using up valuable real estate, and that's something especially business owners appreciate, is the value of the property that's in front of their business. I mean, that's something we're doing a lot in Seattle now, is building parklets and streeteries to actually take advantage of the space that is in front of businesses. And then business owners are starting to say, actually, that space has great value. You know, it's where the, you know, people who buy my ice cream can sit. It's where the people who buy you know, or at my bar can go out and sit in my streetery.
Right.
It didn't have before.
Here's an interesting question. We talked a little bit about before the session started. Someone would like to know how to counter city transit agencies who view bicycling as a threat, perhaps to their revenue stream. So none of us happen to live in cities where we've seen that in action directly. So if you have some more details about that and you're listening, please feel free to pop those in the box and we'll try and offer any more thoughts we can. But it did raise the question of, for other agencies, transit agencies who are obviously needing to prioritize good transit access, good transit use, good transit operation, how do we talk about the benefits of biking? How do we use language that frames biking as part of that multimodal system? And similarly, for other, you know, users of transit, advocates of transit, how do we help those folks understand that even if they don't ride a bike, this could be a good thing to help them, or some other group that might be involved?
Well, I mean, I think the big thing is that it's a little different in New York because no one really talks about revenue being taken from the transit agency if people switch to biking. If anything, they talk about City Bike, for example, alleviating a little bit of the pressure on certain subway lines that are already overcrowded. But that being said, biking complements transit. It could take a person who is currently choosing to drive because they live a great distance from the nearest train station or bus stop, and they just say, you know what, it's going to be more worth it for me to just, once I'm in the car, keep driving straight to work or straight to the grocery store. Instead, that 15-minute walk to the bus stop or the train station is now a 5-minute bike ride, if it's safe, if there's a bike share station or a place to lock their own bike, and that person is now added themselves to the transit system and providing value to the transit system. So, I think the answer is we actually think that bike lanes and safe places for people to lock up their bikes near transit stations will increase ridership. People who bike tend to use transit for longer distances, or when the weather is not as good, or for a whole host of other reasons. They're going to be more likely to use transit in many cases.
Cathy, any
when we
language
were
tips?
talking earlier, it's not some, but the language that we need to use for people who are doing transit planning is how do we encourage people to walk and bike to their transit stations. I mean, I think this is something that we're facing a lot in Seattle, is how to like open up the possibility of being able to safely walk and bike to transit stops, and then as Doug said, park when we're there.
Cool. I want to return to something that Cathy mentioned in her presentation, which is the accident versus collision thing. I have a personal experience. I just want to get your reaction to this. When I was a newspaper reporter, I heard people making that argument, and I thought that is so ideological. I heard it as a outcome-based argument, and as a reporter, I didn't want to be involved in deciding what the outcomes should be. But the time when someone finally made the case to me that made sense within my sort of value set professionally was somebody said that accident is actually inaccurate because the implication of removing accident is not to assume that somebody is deliberately trying to hit somebody. Of course, they're almost always not. The implication is that there was nothing the person driving could have done. There are no choices that they made that could have led to this, but somebody's making a choice to drive too fast for them to see around the corner. That somebody's making a choice for them to have a phone in their hand. I guess I felt like that was the time, that the moment that word changed places in my head. Do you guys have any thoughts on that in talking to reporters and others about that word?
Sure. I mean, exactly what you said. It's you're prejudging the outcome, and the outcome is that there is no responsibility either on the part of the person who caused some terrible collision, or on the part of responsibility on the city that engineered a system that is not usable in a safe way.
We in New York, the New York Police Department used to have the accident investigation squad, and advocates and other people got them to change it to the collision investigation squad, because the assumption, of course, was, well, if it's an accident, why do you need to investigate? If nobody's really to blame. I guess the thing I would say too is, planes crash, trains crash, cars have accidents. And so we would never say there was a plane accident yesterday and 135 people died. We would say a plane crashed. And so I have challenged reporters and say, if you wouldn't use it in the one context until you know what happened in the case of the plane, why are you using it in this? And that argument, I mean, it sounds a little smarty pants. I know how it probably sounds as I've presented it, but I do think it makes sense to them on an intellectual level, because there are a lot of smart reporters, but who are also very vested in the language that they're using. And I think appealing to them on that level of like, I'm just going to challenge you a little bit. Would you describe a train crash as a train accident until you knew what happened? And I think that sometimes has worked for us.
Kid, how are we on time?
We are about a minute before the top of the hour, so we do have plenty of questions that have been posted, and we'd love to get to a few if that's possible.
Great. Sorry, I didn't mean to crowd you out.
Oh, no worries. It was a fascinating conversation and really fun to listen to. A couple of questions I'd like to pull out. One has to do with, it's from Charlie, who asks, does it make sense to emphasize people walking before people biking when dealing with both modes of transportation?
I guess it depends on the project, but sure, I think more people can see it. We're all pedestrians at some point. We're all people on foot. You get off your bike, you get out of the train, you get out of your car. So I do think that that probably makes sense in certain situations.
Okay. And then a question from Tim, which follows up on the transit discussion you were having. Our local transit authority is opposing on-street bike facilities with a big new proposed bus rapid transit project. Seems like we should be on the same page, reducing transit traffic congestion and reducing pollution. Is there any recommended argument when the transit agent is opposing bike lanes and specifically separated bike lanes?
Cathy, do you want to take that one?
Well, the roadway is, a very valuable commodity, and we've given a lot of it up for free parking, and we are big supporters. Certainly in Seattle, I am, and my organization is of bus rapid transit lanes, and protected bike lanes, and you just have to choose, how that valuable road space is allocated, and if it's a place, if it's a wide enough street that will allow 10-foot car travel lanes and no parking and bus rapid transit and a protected bike lane, maybe that's an option. But look at the street right of way and see how much space there actually is to provide a multiplicity of needs. And I'd argue you don't want to serve all of those needs badly by trying to serve all of them, but you should try to prioritize. And often I think parking is what drops off the roadway when you're really trying to put all sorts of modes into a street.
Also, it can be expensive. 2 or 3 parking spaces are going to add up to perhaps tens of thousands of dollars each, depending on how you build them. But parking for a bike corral could probably be done for just a few $1,000s or less. So, sometimes you might have to appeal, I think, on an economic level to people in government.
And it's been so interesting with bike racks on buses, which over time has become quite popular. There was a lot of resistance initially. So perhaps part of the lesson here is to keep communicating and to view people who are detractors as potential allies and identify ways to make the case so that they'll join on board. So thanks, Chuck, for that point about bike racks and buses. Make people on bikes, people on transit. Well said. A question about some of the images that you presented, Doug, and a lot of people were very laudatory of your presentation, so thanks for that. Kevin would like to know, when you were talking about using pictures with helmets, you mentioned that it depends on whether you use them or not, and but most of the imagery that Kevin sees is rarely helmet-free. So would you like to comment as to when it would be okay to use helmet-free imagery?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think it depends on the culture of your city. Here in New York, I'd say it's probably anecdotally 50-50. When I'm riding to work, I see people wearing helmets. Half of the people wearing helmets and half don't. I think, like I said, if you're just standing on the corner, put the helmet away, because you're going to instantly, if someone just flips on the TV and is watching a news report, you're instantly labeled as the cyclist. So put the helmet away, don't even have it visible. If you're riding around, they want to get some B-roll for a TV segment, for example, and the culture in your city or in your community is that generally people wear helmets. Great, wear one. I also think wearing a helmet can sometimes, in some cases, diffuse the why isn't he wearing a helmet screams that you sometimes hear, and so then that way people might be more inclined to really listen to what you're having to say. So I know that sounds like, yes, wear a helmet, no, don't wear a helmet, but I think you have to kind of make the call. Am I standing on the street corner? No, don't wear a helmet. Am I biking in a park in the middle of a weekday when it's not that busy? Maybe not. Am I biking down a busy thoroughfare and I would normally wear one anyway? Sure, you should wear one. So I think it really depends on, like I said, the culture. Nobody here in New York really actually, I think, would scream out, why isn't he wearing a helmet? Because most people on city bikes, for example, are not. If your town does not have bike share and the culture is that everyone is wearing helmets, go for it. You don't want to distract from what your overall message is.
Okay, and then we'll just take 2 more questions, although there are many more, and we'll send them to the presenters for them to take a look at later. Brandon would like to know, how do you diffuse the angry bike opponent when cornered or put on the spot?
My big tactic is to agree with them. If someone screams at you, well, the cyclists always run red lights, it doesn't really yield any benefits to tell them that they're wrong. Cyclists do run red lights. I mean, here in New York, tons of cyclists run red lights. I think the most important thing to say is, yeah, you know, I agree with you. Way too many cyclists break the law while they're on their bikes. And then that can start to diffuse the anger. And then you can get into, well, why is that? You know, why are the cyclists riding on the sidewalks? I agree, they should not be riding on the sidewalks. But what if we put a bike lane next to the sidewalk and protected it with cars or concrete or cones? Maybe that would get them off. And, well, you know, then you're in a territory where then they might have to start to agree with you.
And if people are angry, they're angry for a reason. They usually had a very bad incident of some kind or another, and it's good to actually kind of, and I agree with what Doug said, but it's good to draw them out and to kind of be compassionate. Say, my goodness, you know, that was a difficult situation that you were in when that person on a bike went right in front of you at a red light. You must have been very frightened. Because that's their anger speaking. It's fear, and often it's fear. And listening to that story is very cathartic for those people. You know, that specific story, not about all bicyclists run through red lights, but that particular incident that caused them to be fearful.
That is such an excellent answer.
There's a great quote from.
Go ahead.
There's a great quote from Fran Lebowitz, the humorist. He says, there's no such thing as questions from the audience, only comments from the audience. And I think that people really just want to be heard. Like Cathy said, if they have fear, they want to vet that fear. So if you give people that opportunity to just talk and be heard, that by itself diffuses most of the anger.
Excellent. Great answer. So this is the last question, although again there are many more, so thanks to everyone who asked a question. Alyssa wonders, how do you develop and mobilize supporters to respond to negative messages and to participate in events?
I mean, we've cultivated through our advocacy here with the Prospect Park West Bike Lane, for example, we have a huge Facebook page called We Support the Prospect Park West Bike Lane that's still active 4 or 5 years after a lot of this began. Social media, hashtags on Twitter. We have a very active Bike NYC hashtag that can activate a lot of people. Transportation Alternatives has a mailing list that I think is over 100,000 people now, even though their actual membership is less than that. So there are lots of ways. We collect emails at every opportunity that we get. If we're out petitioning, if we're out talking to people, that's a great way to do it.
And it is easy to get people to participate in events. I think a lot more easy than it is to get them to participate in kind of an ongoing advocacy, you know, the slog of going to meetings and political things. But events, and when we can do an action, you know, a crosswalk action instead of a, you know, a crosswalk meeting, we'll do that. And as far as keeping people engaged, again, it all becomes about the people. You know, they need, it's a social thing. You know, they need to be seen, be heard, be recognized. People who are members of our local Greenways groups get to know each other as really good friends. They continue to meet and continue to advocate because they've, over the years learned to trust and know each other as people, and that's golden. I mean, that's the kind of advocates that you want to have out there representing the whole message of safe streets. So yeah, you have to really respect the fact that people are giving their time and giving their passion when you're it isn't just recruiting numbers of people, it's recruiting individuals.
Well, thank you to our presenters. Thank you to People4Bikes for supporting and underwriting today's webinar. Thank you to Michael Andersen, to Cathy Tuttle, and also to Doug Gordon. So we are blessed to have had your conversation, and with that we'll bid everyone adieu. And just a reminder that if you want to share this information with others, it is going to be on the APBP's YouTube channel shortly. So thanks and have a great afternoon.